welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gornoski, and we're having a great time live on the program today. And I'm happy to have our guest with us now. He talks about nutrition in a way that few people do. He understands that the nutritional paradigm is broken, but it's not necessarily sugar that's driving a lot of the diseases today. It's actually something we call vegetable oils or seed oils. Tucker Goodrich joins us now. How are you, sir?
I'm good, David. How are you?
Doing well. I wanted to have you on again to give us an update on what you've been kicking around with your blog, Yelling Stop, and your podcast. Tell me, what are the things you've been researching this week as you dedicate your life to explaining health and nutrition in a way that people can understand and actually act on in a way that makes demonstrable change?
Well, I got back onto the topic of heart disease. I put a little primer together for people, which so far has only been released on Twitter. I'm probably going to put it up as a podcast episode on YouTube. Just walking people through what actually happens and what changes your LDL from being a normal, non-toxic part of your body to being something that causes disease. I mean, it's kind of funny, the idea that there's heart disease happens because essentially your body's out to get you, right? That it's producing this thing in your body, cholesterol and LDL, whatever they want to call it, that is, killing you and is the result of you having an early death. Doesn't make much sense because we know that, back before the 20th century and people didn't get heart disease the way that they do nowadays. It wasn't the leading cause of death. There were famous cardiologists who never encountered somebody who'd had a heart attack in their practice. One of the guys who founded the American Heart Association and wound up taking care of President Eisenhower said that early in his career there was no such thing as a heart attack. And then all of a sudden the cardiologists are the busiest, wealthiest doctors in the country. What changed? So I tried to put together a simple primer that anybody could follow without having to go through any of the literature, just showing people with a couple of bar graphs, this is what changes in your body when you eat too much seed oils, and this is what happens to your LDL and why your LDL goes from being a perfectly normal part of your body's metabolism to something that's toxic and is going to cause a variety of diseases, primary among which are heart disease. So seems to have gotten pretty good response so far, and I think that a lot of people, this radio show is a wonderful avenue to do it, but a lot of people are really visual and they don't like to read long, verbose articles. They'd rather have a, simple graphic explanation. So that's what I tried to provide. And I think I'm going to do more of those because I got really good feedback on it.
And this was explaining Ox LDL, is that right?
Oxidized LDL, yes. What is oxidized LDL and why should I care?
So let's start with the first thing. What is LDL? We're going to go very simple.
So LDL, so in your body, when, everybody's body runs on basically two fuels, fat and sugar, right? And your body sends the fat around using these things that we call LDL. LDL is basically they go out as your liver releases these little bitty particles. They go out as what they call VLDL, which is very low density lipoprotein, and they're full of fat, and they come back to the liver or go into other cells with most of the fat removed because cells need fat to live, and they come back with most of the fat removed with a little bit of cholesterol left and some fat left. And this is the point at which, the cardiologists say this thing is looking to kill you. And the problem with that is we know from experiments cardiologists have done that there's nothing wrong with LDL. LDL only becomes a problem when the fats in the LDL become oxidized, right? Because there's more fat in LDL than there is cholesterol. And when the fat in the LDL becomes oxidized, it becomes toxic and it becomes dangerous to the molecules in your body, but because it damages them, and it oxidizes the cholesterol, and the cholesterol then becomes toxic and becomes dangerous to the molecules in the body.
What is the difference between the fat in your body and cholesterol in your body? What is that, the difference?
Cholesterol is actually, they're both made up of the same basic atoms, right? Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. It's just the structure of it determines what your body is going to use it for, right? Cholesterol, because it's inert, meaning it doesn't do much, is used throughout your body to build the cell walls, right, that give your body structure. It's an essential thing in the body. And for that reason, most of the cholesterol in your body is produced by your body, right? Not because your body's trying to kill you, but because your body needs lots of cholesterol. And it's super important in the brain. It's so important in the brain that the brain makes sure that it produces its own cholesterol. Because if you don't have cholesterol, if you don't have enough cholesterol, you wind up start to have problems with your nerves and your neurons, which is why one of the side effects that a lot of people report with taking statins are neurological problems and memory deficits, because you are literally preventing your body from making a basic building block molecule that it needs to operate. So cholesterol on its own is completely fine. Fats on their own are completely fine. If either one of them start getting oxidized, that's when you run into problems, because that's when they can start becoming toxic. And what's interesting in LDL, like in everything, in every other kind of fat, there are three basic types of fat. There's saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, and polyunsaturated fat. And the fat that gets oxidized, that becomes toxic, is the polyunsaturated fat. And it gets into your LDL because you eat it, right? Because especially with the omega-6 fats that we talk about, your body can't make those. You've got to eat them. And if you eat too much of them, then you predispose your LDL to becoming toxic and kicking off atherosclerosis and heart disease. And this was first shown back in the 1980s. I mean, this isn't news, right? It's just, they don't, well, we get back to these. I don't know how to explain why they're doing what they're doing, but their own research shows that what causes heart disease is consumption of seed oils, which then become oxidized and toxic. And there's a vast literature, hundreds of thousands of papers looking at this stuff.
And by the way, we don't usually take calls with your segments with me. We kind of dive into the thing, but I wanted to open up if somebody did want to call in with a question about vegetable oils, what we call seed oils, or LDL, and the scientific research that you've gathered about heart disease. They can call in at 727-587-1040. That's 727-587-1040. Or email me hello@aneighborschoice.com, and we can get to that time permitting. But let's stop back again just to reiterate. So what causes oxidation of LDL? What is going on? What is oxidation? These are terms that people hear and they're numbed out to them. They just know that's bad, but they don't really know. I'm saying it for myself too. I'm not.
Yeah. So oxidation is just when an oxygen atom attaches itself to another molecule, right? Now, in the extreme case, everybody's seen a candle burn, right? That is fats getting oxidized. That's all that it is. In your body, it happens in a much more controlled fashion, for obvious reasons. Otherwise, you'd burst into flames. People's bodies put out an enormous amount of energy. I mean, it's comparable to the amount of energy that's on the surface of the sun. People don't realize how much energy a human body produces, right? I mean, that was the whole premise behind that movie, The Matrix.
Wait a second. What do you mean it's like the sun?
If you look at the amount of energy produced by a human body, it is similar to the surface of the sun. The difference is the sun is huge. So it puts out such a vast quantity of energy that it, far overwhelms what any single person can do. But humans are putting out an enormous amount of energy, right? I mean, that's why as warm-blooded creatures, that's what makes us superior to animals that have to depend on, is it a warm day or a cold day, and if it's a cold day, I can't run around.
What's the difference between oxidation and inflammation?
Oxidation can cause the damage that your body reacts to with inflammation, right? Inflammation in the body is always a reaction to some kind of an injury, right? Always. It's the first step of your body's repair mechanisms. So if you burn your finger on a candle, you're going to get inflammation because your body detects this damage. And one of the ways it detects the damage is by these oxidized fats. Your body knows there shouldn't be oxidized fats floating around. So it says, oh my goodness, something bad has happened. Let's start the process of healing this. And the first step in that process is inflammation. Now, physicians used to think that inflammation was a bad thing. And that's why, for instance, if you got a burn or an injury, they would recommend putting ice on it to slow down the inflammation. But they've now realized that inflammation is part of the healing process and that you don't actually want to ice an injury because that prevents your body's inflammation process from healing the injury.
Very interesting. So oxidation is a result is the first thing, and then inflammation is the cleanup, or how does this chart flow?
Right. Well, oxidation is, just like in a car runs on oxidation, right? But we're assuming here that the gas is going where it's supposed to go, into the engine, where it is lit on fire and it makes a little explosion that pushes your engine along, and that's what makes your car move. That's all well and good. Just like in your body, if if you get a gas leak and that gas catches on fire, then your car's going to burn up. That's bad oxidation. So it's all the context in which the oxidation happens, right? If your cells are oxidizing fats and sugars for fuel, that's what's supposed to happen. That's a good thing. The problem is when oxidation starts happening in uncontrolled ways in your body, right? That's what causes the inflammatory response.
Because vegetable oils are an artificial fuel that were never meant to be used as human food, it's creating fires in the body, and it's like it's leaking the energy out of the body's proper place and use of energy.
Well, the problem is it's so susceptible to getting oxidized that
what's so susceptible? Vegetable oils?
The vegetable oils are so susceptible to getting oxidized that it happens in places where it shouldn't. And anybody who's ever done a furniture refinishing project has been told, if you use linseed oil, which is a seed oil, right, from flaxseed. It's the same thing as the flaxseed oil they sell in the store, by the way, just not food grade. If you have a cloth that is soaked in linseed oil and you leave it out in the sun, it will actually burst into flames, right? That's how delicate these oils are and how susceptible they are to oxidizing where they shouldn't oxidize. Now, compare that to something like beef tallow, which is very stable, and if you put it out in the sun, it's going to get soft, but it's not going to burst into flames.
I see. And that's the problem with vegetable oils, is it bursts into flames in your body?
That's pretty much it. That is pretty much it.
You're not saying it's physically a flame. Could you measure it? I mean, would it look like a little spark if you could look at it visually?
Well, you can actually measure it. They can see the light flashes in cells from the seed oils oxidizing in your body, right? They actually they send out photons, little flashes of light, and they can look inside of your cells and they can see this stuff oxidizing in your body. Just like, the light of a candle, it puts out heat, it also puts out light.
Now, wait a second. I remember Dr. Kate Shanahan mentioned that and I know this is different, but the mitochondria, the little energy batteries in your cells, they show them running on vegetable oils versus saturated fat or monounsaturated fat. And when they're running on vegetable oils, they say they're producing a dimmer light. So how does that figure if these vegetable oils are creating flashes of light in the cellular structures you're observing? How does that make sense?
Well, just to go back to our car analogy, if your car's running down the road and you get a fire in the engine compartment, sooner or later it's going to slow down. It's not going to work as well because you have damage that's happening to your car that is going to prevent it from functioning the way it's supposed to. And that's exactly what's happening with seed oils, right?
So when the engine's running out of your cells because you're feeding your body margarine and canola oil, you're going to these chain restaurants and eating steak slathered with soybean oil, and your bread is slathered with soybean oil and canola oil and all these different things, safflower, sunflower, your ice cream's got soybean oil, everything's in it. What you're doing is you're burning out your engines and your little cells, and they're fusing out. They're not having any power, and all the power is basically leaking and kind of popping off all over your body where it's not supposed to be happening. Is that right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And the United States government has subsidized this and continues to subsidize this, and almost every group, like the American Heart Association, continues to tell our loved ones to dive into vegetable oils.
That is unfortunately correct. I mean, when the American Heart Association came out in 1961 and told everybody that they should start eating seed oils for their heart health, they had never been able to show, they had never at that point shown that that was actually beneficial to humans. They had never bothered to prove it before they told everybody in the country to do it. And when they finally got around to doing the tests, what they found was exactly the reverse. That if you give people more seed oils, it causes higher risk of death and, in fact, a higher death rate in people who are given more seed oils. And at that point, they should have turned around and said, we blew it, we messed up, this is the stuff that's actually causing the problem when we give it to people in a controlled environment. But they didn't. They kept pushing the message. And even when studies came out, in the 1990s, there was a famous study that came out, the Lyon Diet Heart study out of France, that showed that reducing these oils in the diet improved, the most successful cardiovascular disease reduction trial in history. People who'd already had a heart attack, it lowered their risk of a second heart attack by 70%. Almost triple what a statin will do if your doctor prescribes you a statin. And they didn't report it honestly, in my opinion.
They did not what? Say that again?
They didn't report it honestly, in my opinion. They didn't come out and say, this proves, we showed in the 1960s that increasing seed oils makes people have more heart disease, and this guy's just shown that decreasing seed oils makes people have less heart disease. And they just buried it as best they could.
Wow. And there's so much fake news that we're learning about, whether it's in public health policy, whether it's in what's being taught in our schools, whether it's what puberty blockers do to little kids, whether it's foreign policy. And now, as our show is at the tip of the spear of bringing to a mass audience this notion that so much of nutrition, and people know this in a fuzzy way. They usually land on the carb and sugar deal, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, because that's generally where people are at. Like, yeah, the public. Because if I talked to Blake Masters about this on my podcast. He's running for Senate, and I said, yeah, the food pyramid is messed up. And he said, yeah, and he kept focusing. He talked about seed oils, but he also kept talking about sugar. And that generally is where people are at in terms of their awareness. But it's really the sugar is the little sidekick to the problem. It's like a Batman movie where you're watching it and you think one villain is the main villain, and you're like, oh, you're on the trail trying to get it, and then you realize there's another villain that's even more powerful who's really moving the problem and creating it, right? And that's where the vegetable oils are.
That's exactly right. And sugar definitely makes it worse. I mean, they've done studies, in human children where they give them fructose, the part of sugar that they like to blame for the harm of sugar. It's an alleged harm of sugar. But what they measure to show that fructose is doing damage to your body are actually the oxidized seed oils. That fructose accelerates the oxidative damage to seed oils in your body. And that's what they're measuring. They're saying, oh, look at this damage that's happening. And, you know, the damage isn't happening because of the sugar. The damage is happening because your body has been saturated with these seed oils over the last few decades, your entire life in the United States, that they tell you are healthy. And yet they're saying, oh, look, it breaks down and it's poisonous. It's probably bad for you. Eat less sugar because it won't break these fats down into poisons. That doesn't make sense. I mean, sugars, we evolved to eat sugar. You can get away with eating a certain amount of sugar on a healthy diet, and it's fine. Weston Price showed that. Weston Price came up with a diet to heal cavities, and it had, I was shocked when I first saw that because he fed those kids more sugar than I had been eating for years at that point because I was so worried about cavities. But he also gave them all the rest of the components of a diet that made it healthy and allowed the teeth to actually heal the cavities.
Yeah, and how do you heal cavities in his way?
His big thing was butter. Eat lots of butter. And what have they been telling us not to do since the 1960s? Don't eat butter. He found that there are components in butter that are essential to the body for repair and for healing. Right?
Is it just the saturated fat or something else in the butter?
No, it's not the saturated fat. It's some other components that we're probably going to have to go over on another episode. That would be a fun conversation to have.
Yeah, let's table that.
How two scientists showed in the 1930s how to cure calories, and I'm willing to guess that none of your audience have ever heard that that's even possible.
Right. Very interesting. Well, Tucker, appreciate you coming on as always and giving us a nutritional dialogue for everybody to think and spark thought and change, hopefully in their lives, to protect their loved ones from the ravages of these terrible products, these omega-6 rich foods and these vegetable oils. And I think we're going to change the game on this. It's going to be hard, and you might get canceled, Tucker, but that's okay.
Well, hopefully not by you, David. I really appreciate your support in getting this message out. Thank you very much. And
I'm proud of you being always willing to explain things over and over and over again in different ways, because that's the only way the public is going to see it and catch on. You got to keep repetition going. So thank you for doing that. That's it for A Neighbor's Choice. You can go to blog at yelling-stop.blogspot.com or just type in Tucker Goodrich on your search engine and find his stuff there. You can also follow him at Tucker Goodrich on Twitter or search for Tucker Goodrich on YouTube and subscribe to his channel where he's got podcasts of his own outside of what we do together on this program. And you can email me, of course, hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's hello@aneighborschoice.com. So glad to have this time with you. So many great guests this last 2 hours. It's amazing. Nobody does a show as fun as we have together. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed.